they
Gotta go to the money.
people literally get up at the microphone holding checks saying, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that I've got a check here for $500,000 or whatever, and or I've got a check. I think I heard one for like maybe a couple million one time. I mean, it was like there are big checks being handed, and then everyone claps for them, and then we know like that guy's going to get the like chairmanship, or that guy's going to get the committee assignment, or whatever.
I am so offended right now.
Yeah, you should be.
Hey guys, this is the 2020 vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party and his wife. It was fun meeting these two champions of liberty that support the U.S. Constitution. This is not my normal type of reporting, but I felt some of my viewers might enjoy hearing an honest congressman speak about real-world issues within our Congress. Let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, like, share, and subscribe.
So what's it like to be work in Congress? Herding cats?
Well, it used to be more interesting in many respects. I mean, in terms of the type of work I care about. It used to be, I mean, in recent decades it hasn't been great, but I'd say when I started Congress, there was still some legislative function. The legislative branch still had some relevance in terms of actually crafting legislation. And then after Boehner left, it really fell apart. I mean, he was bad. He was so bad that I wanted to oust him from speakership, and then his successors have been much worse. So I want to say I owe him an apology for that, but it's not like he was a very good speaker either. It's just that I didn't.
His face irritated.
I guess I didn't.
That wasn't a good start.
I didn't contemplate that it could get so much worse, and it did.
What would it take to be an effective speaker?
Open the place up. You have to. You have to. Congress is supposed to be a place where people discover outcomes. It's not supposed to be a place where the outcomes are dictated. It's like totally contrary to the whole idea of Congress that you're just going to bring people there and they're just there to press a button, not to actually legislate at all. If we wanted that system, the framers of the Constitution could have just said we're going to have one person be the legislative branch.
Yeah.
And we'll just elect that person. We'll have one person be the president, one person be the legislative branch.
So like
that's not how it's supposed to work.
So like the regular congressman essentially has a lot of the power swiped away from him and taken up to a committee level, right?
The committees don't even have power anymore. It's entirely with the speaker or the leadership team.
And if the speaker will want to share power, how is there something they're not doing? They're just being too power hungry, or how?
No, they're not interested in sharing power because the entire dynamic is set up in such a way that I don't want to say it's inevitable that it would become like this, but you can see how over the years it creeps in this direction. Members of Congress aren't interested in taking responsibility for votes. Like a lot of people who have good gigs, they just want to keep it. So it's not even a matter of like ambition, because people often think it's ambition like to get ahead or get further. Actually, they're just happy to be there, and they're happy to just stay where they are. They're not. Most of them are not thinking about how can I become president, or how can I become a U.S. senator, or how can I become a governor, or whatever. They're just thinking, I'm happy to be here, and how can I keep it? And so
that's awesome insight.
So really what they want more than anything is no sort of responsibility. If
so they're okay having all the power passed away from them.
They're actually eager to have if someone came in and said, I want to be Speaker of the House, and I'm going to make you vote on lots of things, and you're going to have a lot of independent responsibility, and as a result, people are gonna criticize you for this vote or that vote. The people are like, no, don't give me that. Like,
No.
you just,
Right.
you do the stuff,
Yeah.
and then you just send us some money and get us elected again.
So the risk of
Basically.
Am I taking,
Take a seat.
Yeah, please take a seat.
Hello.
Yeah, they don't really want any responsibility. And he just, the speaker then understands this, and donors start to understand this too. Like, if you talk to some of the big donors to Congress, they're aware that the individual members have no power anymore. So increasingly the money just flows into the leadership team, to the Speaker of the House particularly, or the minority leader. And it flows into the party apparatus more. It doesn't go to the individual members in the same way that it might have 20 years ago. So,
And the American citizen ends up getting the snowy end of the stick,
yeah,
essentially.
as a result, the speaker controls everything, controls the legislation, controls the money, controls the whole thing. The speaker is like an omnipotent force. And I think the public really does not understand the degree to which this is the case. Like, there's still a view, a general widespread view that, like, there is some kind of like, the Congress is bad because all these members are individually corrupt. You know, they're basically just actors. I'm not sure they, like I said, they don't even get to the level of corruption. They're playing a role. They can't even be corrupt because they don't have any power. They don't
if there were a Mr. Smith goes to Washington situation, he would just be sitting there, because nothing's
Yeah.
actually happening.
Yeah, there's, like, the idea of like corruption means you have some kind of power, but actually these people don't have any power. They're just, that's not to say that some of them aren't corrupt-minded or whatever, or don't get involved in some corrupt things, but what I'm saying is the broad-based idea, like, that Congress is broken because, like, there's all these, you know, individual bad actors. It's like, you know, Paul Gosar is the reason Congress is broken, or like, you know, just random members of Congress. That's not correct. These people have,
Lamar is here
Yeah.
doing all this terrible
these
stuff.
people sometimes, they sometimes say crazy things on TV or on social media,
But that's the act.
but it's just performance. They don't actually have any power.
So is there,
It's to fool people.
is there a best way to try to address that issue?
I think the only way is public awareness, because I tried to address it from the inside. Like, I don't think any congressman in history has spent more time talking about process from the inside and fighting on process. I really worked at it. I devoted the vast majority of my energy to this process issue. I wrote op-eds about it. When I left the Republican Party, my whole op-ed was basically about process. It wasn't about, like, Trump is bad. I don't even know if I mentioned Trump in the op-ed. People forget that. Like, they say, like, well, he left the Republican Party. I'm not even sure I mentioned Donald Trump in the op-ed when I left the Republican Party.
Well, the news
Look
stories
back
I
on
all
it.
read about it, it
I
was
don't
all
think so.
Trump.
Yeah, I don't think Trump was even mentioned in the op-ed.
Well,
It was the op-ed was about process, how the place is broken, how all the power is at the top now, and members of Congress are just, you know, playing acting roles. And I think this is where we have to dedicate our energy. It's a great issue for the Libertarian Party. I really believe it's like such a strong issue, because normally you're trying to convince people about things that are, you know, sometimes we get into the weeds on this or that. This is like a really easy one to understand. This is not a hard one. So if we're looking for something that the public can really rally behind that differentiates us, this is such an easy one for people to understand. And it's a very libertarian thing. I mentioned it yesterday.
Follow
Like,
the rules.
yeah, if you don't, like, there are so many people who say, increasingly, you hear it on the right and the left, well, you know, all these things like the Constitution doesn't matter and the rules don't matter and all this kind of stuff. And I understand why people get frustrated about those things, because people are not following the Constitution. People are not following the rules. And I understand why the inclination then is to say, well, we shouldn't care about it that much either. We should just care about liberty. But there is no such thing as liberty in a vacuum. Like, liberty is part of a process. Like, there's no there's no environment of liberty when everyone just does whatever they want. Like if each party that gets into power says, well, we're not going to follow any rules, we'll just do whatever the heck we want, there will be no liberty in that system. People are just going to turn to strongmen. They're going to say like, well, we'll put our strongman in there and he'll beat you guys up, and then they'll get their strongman. There's no society in history where people are so like, where there's such distrust among society, and where like it becomes very sectarian, where you have like a libertarian society. So if we want libertarianism, we have to fix this process problem. It's not going to be because we like forced libertarianism on people. Like it's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
We're not gonna like, oh, well, we'll just get our strong man in there and impose libertarianism on
Make them be
you.
free.
Right? They have to want freedom. People have to actually want it. And I think that's what we miss a lot of times.
What's a good first step that, what's a good first step that the regular citizen could take towards making that a reality?
Well, I do think that, I mean, for a citizen to take as a step, I think citizens have to, when they vote, be concerned about the process issues. Will you be able to offer amendments? Will you support a speaker who doesn't let you offer amendments? You know, sometimes it's hard to know. Paul Ryan, for example, promised us that he would open up the House, so it's hard to know he'd never been Speaker. But as soon as you saw that he wasn't going to, you should never vote for him again.
So was it?
And
was
same
it was
with
Ryan?
Pelosi.
It was Ryan that
Yeah.
made it, that actually closed it up for good, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Ryan, in my mind, is one of the worst characters we've ever had in this whole game. You know, like it's just because here's a guy who, you know, he plays this nice, humble, like, you know, aw shucks sort of guy from Wisconsin, and at the same time, he was totally detached, totally just top down. I'm gonna control it from here. I'm gonna pull the strings. Nobody's gonna make any decisions. I'm gonna decide it all from some room somewhere with my, you know, whoever advises him. And it's like not the role of the speaker. That's not how the speakership's supposed to work. So I really, and also he lied to us because he told us he would open it up. So I really have more contempt for him in that sense than I do for Boehner or even Pelosi. Like, you know, I think Pelosi was not like giving anyone the impression that she was going to be a good speaker. So
No, in fact, when she gets in, she's like, well, I'm just going to do what he did.
yeah, she wasn't
No more
hiding.
amendments, yeah.
She wasn't like really hiding the fact that she's going to operate this way. And credit to John Boehner for, as bad as he was, for at least, you know, he would swear at me, yell at me, but he would give me the opportunity to offer amendments. And that did not happen under Paul Ryan. It didn't happen under Pelosi. And also, John Boehner just, he did believe more so than these people in like an institution, you know, sort of actually operating. And I don't know, he was a bad speaker in so many ways, and he was top down in so many ways. But it was like a slightly less egregious top down in the sense that he was pushing his own position heavily. He would rig the system in some ways by having like his deputies or his committee chairman trying to, you know, strong arm people. He twisted arms. He did a lot of things. But one thing he didn't do was totally shut down the process. He would basically, you know, rig the game in the sense that like he'd bias everyone in a certain direction. He'd say we're not going to do it this way, but then he'd let you have the amendment, and then he would work his, you know, his people to try to torpedo your amendment, like
Yeah.
on the floor. So like you get it on the floor, but he would work, you know, overtime to make sure that your amendment had no chance of passing. But at least it was on the floor.
He'd at least let you guys be there, yeah.
And so to me, that was like, look, I don't think he was like fair about amendments. I think that they lied about a lot of amendments, like what the amendments did and like how but at least I got the chance to make my pitch to the people. Like I get to stand up in conference. This never happened in later years. I get to stand up in conference and tell people this is why you should vote for my amendment.
Yeah.
And ended up persuading a lot of people. Like when I did that Amash amendment, it lost 205 to 217. I think that's the figure. So it came close actually.
Yeah.
And that was because Boehner let me stand up in conference and pitch it to people and said, like, look, this is my amendment, this is why you should support it. Now he put his people in to say that I'm lying and I'm like the bad person, I'm gonna cause terrorism to reign, and like, he would say that stuff and he'd call me a terrorist, like, you know, and he'd literally call me a terrorist and things like that. But look, I got to make my pitch to people. So yeah, he called me a terrorist, but
That doesn't even happen.
I would rather be called a terrorist and make my pitch than be totally sidelined and ignored.
Yeah.
And it's not just me, everyone's ignored.
Yeah.
In Congress, you know, people will say, if you look at the House floor, there are amendments that do get offered. These amendments are not freely offered on the floor. They can go through the Rules Committee. So there's been 0 that have been freely offered. In the old days, you could actually come to the House floor and offer an amendment on the floor, and the Speaker could not stop you. As long as it was germane to the bill, the Speaker could not like say, I don't like this amendment. Now they run everything through the Rules Committee. Even then, very few amendments get out of the Rules Committee. But occasionally, the Speaker will, you know, throw someone a bone and say, I'll let you have this amendment. But the amendments that are allowed to get through are consistently amendments that don't do anything, or amendments that have 0 chance of passing. So the Speaker basically rigs the system. If your amendment does something and has a chance of passing, it's not getting to the House floor. So it's a total setup. They put like, oh, bring it to the Rules Committee and we'll, you know.
As long as it's ineffective and has no chance of
Totally,
passing.
and yeah, as long as it's totally ineffective, useless, or has no chance of passing, you know,
That explains why so
then
many
sure, we'll
laws
consider
are
it.
dumbed down.
That is correct.
Yes. I'm a First Amendment auditor. I go around and test government officials, both at federal, state, and local levels, on the respect for the U.S. Constitution. Mainly the First Amendment, because if you're trying to reach people and grow the Libertarian Party, being able to reach the masses is important.
Yeah.
So I go around and catch corrupt government officials. How do you feel about the First Amendment, right to free press?
I'm a huge fan of the First Amendment.
Awesome. I figured as much. You're on camera right now.
Yeah.
You noticed.
You're now on the record
Yeah.
supporting.
Yeah, you're now on the
Always
record.
have been.
I actually have a question about the congressional thing. So,
Yeah.
you know, you say decentralized Congress, which you've already sold me just by saying that. But what does that actually look like in terms of process and structure? Is it removing some of the just the sheer amount of leadership? Is it removing the rules? Like, what does that actually look like?
I haven't thought about whether you totally remove the Rules Committee. You know, I do agree the Rules Committee becomes a big problem, but you know, we've had a Rules Committee in the past where you could still have amendments on the floor. I think for me the bottom line is reducing the Speaker's power and making the Speaker a more institutional figure. Trying to get this message to the public, the Speaker should have a more of a role in sort of like ensuring that the process actually functions rather than being a partisan. So right now the Speaker views her role, it's a woman now, but it could be a man, obviously, views her role as dictating the outcomes.
Right.
And really we should take the Speaker out of the role of dictating any outcomes. The Speaker should be almost like completely detached from the outcomes. The Speaker is just there to ensure that there's a fair process overall. You obviously can't have unlimited amendments, because if you had unlimited amendments, you would get a situation where people would offer each party would offer like 1,000 amendments or 10. You just never get anywhere. Yeah. But the fact that you shouldn't have unlimited amendments doesn't mean you should have no amendments, right? Which is where we're at now. So when you look at a piece of legislation, you might say it should have, I don't know, a couple hundred amendments or something. And then you spend a lot of time on it. Instead of spending 1 week on it, you spend 3 weeks on it, or 4 weeks. There are some rules changes you could have about, like, if there's any change made to the bill through an amendment, people get more time to read it. They get to, there's a period of time to read it. 'Cause
Right.
a lot of times what happens now is the speaker is crafting these bills, then dropping them on people, and they're being told to vote on it right away. Or,
85,000
yeah.
page bill you have to vote
Yeah.
out, yeah.
Or they're making an amendment through, I've seen bills sometimes where they have a shell bill that they've released for a little while, that it doesn't really have anything in it, and then they insert a speaker's amendment at the very last second, and they say, oh, well, you've had the bill for a while. I'm like, well, this amendment added like 700 pages.
Right.
And they're like, well, you had the bill for 2 weeks. No, well, I only had this amendment for 10 seconds, so,
Yeah.
so anytime you make a change to it, the clock should start over.
Right.
But the bottom line is, it's not so much about changing the rules of the House. It's about following the rules of the House. The rules of the House are inherently designed to create a discovery process where people can offer amendments and have time to read legislation. There's an inherent structure to them that is actually pretty open. It's just that they're not followed ever. They are waived and suspended constantly. I don't remember, in my entire time in Congress, there was not a week where we didn't waive or suspend the rules. The whole time I was there, not 1 week.
And you spent like 8 years there, no?
10 years.
10 years.
In 10 years, the rules were never followed, actually, according to what was written in the rules.
So to elect people that believe that is the best way to?
I think so, yeah. Because I don't think there's any, it's not about, this is almost like a matter of it's not about the actual structure itself being problematic. It's not this is true of the Constitution too. The Constitution is not the real problem. The problem is that nobody follows it. The rules of the House themselves are not inherently the problem. There are bad rules in the rules of the House. But I'm saying it's not the rules that are inherently the problem. It's that the rules are not actually followed. Everything is completely top-down, run by one person. So it's more about getting the public animated about that idea and that issue that I think can be helpful to us. In other words, I don't think they understand, and I know this from conversations. In my district, they came to understand it because I talked about it so much. But outside of my district, people I think generally do not understand that the speaker controls so much and that members of Congress are so useless. They still think that members of Congress can amend things or change things, and if you are complaining on Twitter, then what are you doing? Why aren't you actually fixing it in the House? Well, we're not fixing it in the House because we don't.
Because why aren't you there? I
Yeah.
remember seeing that last year. You would put something out and someone would be like, well, why don't you go in and do that? It's like,
I'm not able to.
Can't.
Right, I'm not allowed to. There is no
With a hammer and
and this is also this also creates another interesting situation where people say well, Justin, if only you were still there working on this stuff. Well, Thomas Massey and I have the same amount of power. We both can tweet. And that's essentially the power we have. There is no power to actually amend legislation or change anything on the House floor. We tried, I tried, Thomas has tried, others have tried, and it doesn't work. You can't actually change the system from the inside. There's too much inertia. Even when you start to get something going, like the House Freedom Caucus, and originally the House Freedom Caucus was a process group. Go and read the House Freedom Caucus mission statement. It doesn't say anything about conservatism. It doesn't say anything about Republicans. It's none of that stuff. It is literally a process group. And that's why we created it, as a process organization.
Liberal media labeled that an extremist group.
They did, yeah. They did, but then some of those colleagues who originally were joining a process group, they sort of played into the idea that they were just a Trump group or whatever. They played into it. They played it right into the hands of the media on that stuff. Because as soon as Trump was elected, they abandoned the idea of opening up the House floor, and they just fell in line with Donald Trump, which was one of the reasons I left the group. Because I told them every day, you guys started as a process group. Our whole issue was, how do we open up the House floor? How do we allow people to offer amendments? And now that Trump is in office, it's just whatever Trump wants is what we're doing.
which is wild because they're still in a body that's in charge by Democrats.
Yes.
So even for partisan reasons, you would think that it would make sense to continue fighting that fight.
Yeah, but they don't.
All they cared about was Donald Trump.
Right. There's a couple people like, Chip Roy will talk about it every once in a while, but there just are not that many people who will talk about process anymore. Thomas obviously will talk about it from time to time, but as a general matter, it is not. The members they have in their party, the stronger they are.
Stronger monster.
Yeah.
And
That's it. Individually, they're not even that interested in they're just, these guys underneath are just play acting.
Yeah. And individually, besides tweeting, you can be a good performer, which might make you get to rise up the ranks.
Yes.
Or, if nothing else, just become somewhat of a minor celebrity. Like you
Right.
see that with AOC.
Yes.
Like it's like,
So-
she gets to go to the balls and wear the dresses.
I've
and stuff
never
like that.
understood
But
why she's so powerful.
in terms of power, there's no actual power there.
There's no power. They're just trying to maintain what they have, which is they have a good gig where they don't have a lot of responsibility, and people say, thank you, Congressman, you're so great, Congressman,
Yeah.
honorable so and so everywhere they go.
Yeah.
It's just like an ego trip for them. It is not about actually being able to legislate, or they don't care about any of that stuff because they have no power there anyways, nor do they want that power. This is what I think is not well understood either. They're not interested in the power. They do not want it. This is why it's also hard to persuade the public about it, why I've had a challenge as one person, why we need a lot of people talking about it. Because while I will point this out about Congress, if you asked another congressman, they'll say, oh no, we have lots of ability to legislate. What are you talking about? It's Amash is wrong about this. Because they understand that when they're selling their role to the public, they have to look like they're doing something, right? Nobody's voting for someone who doesn't actually have any responsibility. So they have to pretend they have responsibility. So they have to, it's not just that they're playing the part they're playing the part in a secondary sense, in that they have to go out and sell the fact that they're doing it. So they can't even tell you that they don't have responsibility. They won't even admit it. We have the,
why do I vote for you?
yeah, we have the data to show it. I can, I've posted it on Twitter. We can show that they actually have no power. But if you ask individual members of Congress, they'll say, oh yeah, I have plenty of power. I can vote however I want. No one's stopping me.
They
No
can
one's
say
not.
yes or no.
Right. There are a few members of Congress who will admit that there is, that they're basically controlled at the top, but not many of them. What happens with a lot of media types, I'll watch CNN, they're often under the impression that if Mitch McConnell agrees with Nancy Pelosi,
That's good.
that it must be good. And that there couldn't be anything wrong then. As if those two agree, then there couldn't be anything else wrong with the process.
Yeah.
That means the process is working. Because you had a Republican who's a partisan Republican and a partisan Democrat, and they agreed. So the process must be working, otherwise why would they have agreed?
The entire political spectrum
Right.
agrees, right?
Yeah, so that they have to vote for the rule every time. Members of Congress have to actually vote to give up their power constantly. When I say they don't follow the rules, they're literally voting on the House floor to give up their power. Why would they give up their power? They don't think about, well, it's good for them to give up their power because they don't want the responsibility. That doesn't mean we shouldn't tell them they have to have the responsibility just because they don't want it. It doesn't mean it's a good thing. Just because the members of Congress aren't complaining about it doesn't mean it's a good thing and the process is good. Or they don't understand how much influence the speaker has in terms of money or committee assignments or other things. The committee assignments, which are literally pay to play, is another aspect of it. You have to donate money to the party, which is essentially to funnel money to the speaker in order to get your committee assignment.
Is that like the NRCC and the
Yeah. So in the Republican Party, you have to send money to the NRCC. They will literally come with a bill that they present you on the House floor. They'll hand you on the House floor, which is totally corrupt. Here's how much you owe the party.
Oh, you mean a bill I thought you meant a house bill.
No. I mean like a check, like an invoice.
You've been invoiced, sir.
Yeah, like they will come up to you and say, so and so, you owe $150,000. and they will hand it to you on the floor,
You have to raise that.
and you have to raise it to get the committee assignment. And if you don't give them the money, you don't get the committee assignment. I don't know how that's just not
That's
like,
somehow
I don't know,
illegal.
it should be illegal,
Yeah.
right?
That's
It's
somehow
like-
worse than I envisioned.
Yeah,
That's
no,
incredible.
there's literally an invoice that is handed to you. I kept some of these, by the way. I held on to them. I held on to them because I wanted to be able to show people later on. But there's literally, and my bill's pretty cheap compared to other people, by the way. Because they were like, well, we can't get much out of him. So they were asking me
Yeah,
for
how
like,
much, how much was your bill for?
they were asking me for like low six figures and stuff. So like, it's
That is incredible.
like they were, no, sometimes only five figures, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so.
That's a steal.
It's real, yeah.
Where's that money going then?
So you give them the money,
Yeah.
and you can raise it any way you want. You could hand them, you could pay them the money from your own pocket. You could get some big donor to give them the money. You can, any way you can get them the money, you give them the money, and then they will put you on the committee that you want. So, you know, my invoices were relatively cheap compared to other people. I didn't pay them, but other people's, like you had some that were astronomically large. And then
Well,
once-
Speaker Pelosi
Yeah,
gets
that's
billed
fine.
2 million a year. Or 2
yeah,
million.
yeah, and then once a month they would hold this meeting, and it's a conference meeting, like for all the Republicans to get together. And you'd think, well, okay, we're going to have this conference meeting to talk about policies and other things. No, this conference meeting, once a month, they had a special one where you just talk about money. And
Gotta go to the money meeting.
people literally get up to the microphone holding checks saying, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you that I've got a check here for $500,000 or whatever. And or
Wow.
I've got a check, I think I heard one for like maybe a couple million one time. I mean, it was like, there are big checks being handed. And then everyone claps for them, and then we know like that guy's going to get the like chairmanship, or that guy's going to get the committee assignment, or whatever.
I am so offended right now.
Yeah, you should be. Look what actually happens through legislation. Like, would they ever take up like actually ending qualified immunity or ending civil asset forfeiture? Or like these Democrats are in power right now,
That sounds
and
like
they're not
that would be
doing it.
good.
Right? They're-
Yeah.
Like you have, we're in a great position right now to sell this stuff because you can see that the Democrats control a lot of things right now, and they're not doing the things that they said they would do. They're not. Yeah, they're not ending any of this stuff. They didn't do, they can talk all they want about like, they want to blame it on Tim Scott because they didn't get the policing and justice reform, and I'm sure Tim Scott's to blame in part, but it's also the Democrats are to blame. Like they're not, they could take individual items like ending qualified immunity, like civil asset forfeiture, like the drug war. They could take individual items, put them on the House floor, vote on them, and have Biden sign it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are actually, on a number of these issues, I'm sure you'd get 10 Republicans in the Senate to go along too.
Easily.
So like just,
As a standalone?
Yeah, as a
do you support
standalone.
Qualified immunity or
Right.
not, you could probably get, I mean, 70
right,
senators.
as a standalone, and then also, this is another thing, like open up the process. Like put something on the floor and then allow people to amend it. And it won't necessarily be everything you want, but it will be something and it will pass and it will get signed. But they don't do that. You know, it may not be the bill that I think is the perfect bill, but it'll be something that moves us in the right direction and it will get signed on justice reform. But the Democrats don't do that because they're playing the same game as the Republicans, which is a messaging game. Nancy Pelosi will offer something, it'll be like, take it or leave it, a huge package. The Republicans will offer their own take it or leave it huge package. Each one can then walk away and be the winner. They'll say, oh, we were fighting so hard for you. Look at all the things we put into our package. And the Republicans are the same way. Look, we put all this stuff into our package. Well, it never becomes, none of it becomes law, like the justice reform stuff doesn't become law. And then they just walk away and they say, look, we did our best, we tried. It was, this is the other party that stopped us, you know.
Yeah.